I'm Raymond Dean with a report on a little-known but extremely disturbing threat to the United States, a terrorist menace that sits brooding just off America's coastline.
Various hazmat crews trained together.
What you are seeing are simulated attacks by terrorists using chemical weapons on several cities in the United States. These war games are designed to train law enforcement officers, medical technicians, and hospital personnel on how to deal with such emergencies. Why are these costly and time-consuming exercises held? Because our own government is convinced that the United States is a prime target for terrorist attacks. In fact, President Clinton has asked Congress for $1.5 billion in order to prepare the country for events like this. The nature and extent of the threat we face should come as no surprise to any American. Many TV stations and several networks have broadcast special programs about the vulnerability of our open society to chemical and biological attack. Newspapers across the country have published special reports about this threat to United States security. A number of books and magazine articles on biowarfare have been published, intended to place the U.S. population on the alert. Some have been fiction. Others have been terrifying fact. Yet, in the face of all these reports, as well as several recent terrorist attacks within the borders of the United States, the American people seem curiously reluctant to believe that they are in extreme danger. We persist in telling ourselves, it can't happen here, despite the fact that one of the greatest dangers we face comes from only 90 miles away, from Cuba's Fidel Castro. Over the past 2 decades, Fidel Castro has invested more than $3.5 billion in developing a genetics and biological research institute. It's supposedly devoted to developing medicines for the Cuban people. But hidden deep within that project is a very sophisticated biowarfare program. We asked several experts about Cuba's biowarfare program. Roberto Fabricio, Deputy News Director of El Herald, the Spanish-language edition of the Miami Herald, said in a recent conference,
back in 1987, Central Intelligence Agency was commissioned to write a research informational document on biological warfare. And it produced a long, nearly 100-page document that one of my sources that had, at the time, the ability to read these documentations because of the level of clearance, indicated that it spelled out clearly the Cuban development of a very, very active and sophisticated biological weapons systems. Now, in 1991, something that I think has made an important contribution recently to all this knowledge, a man named Ken Alibek, who was the #2 person in the Soviet biological warfare industry, an institute called Biopreparat. He defected to the United States. For a whole bunch of years, actually until about 2.5 years ago, Dr. Alibek, former colonel, was privately a consultant to the U.S. Defense and Intelligence establishment. And he spent literally thousands of hours being debriefed. He has revealed, and this is from the official U.S. Government sources, the most significant amount of information that this country has over the Soviet or the Russian capability to attack this country in that sense.
You know, there are several, let me say, indicators of this program. And some of them from, let me say, from my previous experience, from my previous knowledge, I mean, when I was in the Soviet Union, in Russia, and some additional information I obtained here in the United States. First, for me, some information came from my superiors, and specifically General Kalinin. He was the chief of the main directorate Biopreparat, and he went to Cuba in 1990, I believe. And he saw some facilities in Cuba, and according to him, at least one of them was very suspicious, and some closed sections, and high level of security. And of course, usually regular biotechnological facilities do not require such a level of security. And another information is just, of course, I can continue this enumeration, but one more piece of information just was published in 1998 by Defense Intelligence Agency of the United States.
Eduardo Prida was a research scientist at the Cuban Air Force Science Bureau until his defection 2 years ago.
Castro tiene instalaciones, almacena.
Castro has installations, storages, produces and develops chemical, biological, and bacteriological weapons. They began to be produced around 1980-81 when the Soviet Union gave what the Cuban government called Pandora's box, installations to mount 2 plants of military gases, one in the Matanzas region and the other in Pinal del Rio.
Professor Manuel Cereijo of Florida International University has this to say about Castro's biowarfare program.
Certainly he has the capabilities. He has about 9 centers dedicated to do research and development in biotechnology, in biochemical area. He has a state-of-the-art equipment. He has very well-known and renowned scientists and engineers, and he has spent over $3,500 million in the last 10 years in these activities. Is he doing something related to biowarfare? We cannot say so until we inspect inside. But if you put together the amount of capital funds invested in this, the amount of intellectual capital invested in these fields, and the very little commercial activities and success, the probabilities are that yes, he's doing something drastic in the area of biowarfare.
Colonel Alvaro Prendes of the Cuban Air Force, who escaped Cuba some time ago, told us,
we received some information from Cuba directly from some generals and friends of mine that revealed the actual state of the potentially building of new installation for the drugs. We already have an information of all the installations in Cuba that they are working in the drug for the bacteriological warfare. It's a great potential danger for the United States, no doubt about it.
Professor Cereijo spoke about the types of viruses that Castro could be developing for his biowarfare program.
There are 3 or 4 viruses or bacteria that are used in this area. One of them is anthrax. Anthrax is very powerful. It's non-contagious, which means that you cannot transmit it from person to person. Smallpox. Smallpox is very contagious, very powerful, easy to produce in the lab, and since it was eradicated from the world in 1977, there are only 7 million vaccines in the United States. And an epidemic of smallpox, for example, in the United States would be catastrophic.
We asked Dr. Alibek how a biowarfare attack could be launched on the United States.
You can use some aerosol application techniques for aerosolizing in shopping malls, in metro systems, commercial buildings, through ventilation shafts, through input ventilation systems, too many techniques.
It's very easy in a sense. You can bring it in a suitcase. You can bring it with you if you are a traveler. Then you can dust it through the air with an airplane and nobody will see the dust because we are talking about particles that are odorless, tasteless, and very, very small. You can say that 150 particles of anthrax, for example, put together one after the other, will take the thickness of a human hair. So that's about the size of these particles. So it's very, you can disseminate it through a truck or a van. You can leave it in a bottle, and when the bottle opens or breaks, it disseminates. So you don't need missiles, you don't need sophisticated delivery system. Any person that is trained to do this can bring it over and disseminate it in this country.
Castro posee además
Castro has the necessary delivery systems, which are the SS-22 and the SS-20 missiles, which were given to Cuba after the perestroika period. He has these weapons of mass destruction to pressure and be recognized in world opinion as a leader of the countries that have a hard line against the United States.
Un elemento líder dentro de los países que componen una línea dura contra Estados Unidos.
Why would Castro, with an economy that's barely able to feed the Cuban people, invest so much in a biowarfare program? What are his intentions?
The intentions are like this, and I know Fidel Castro personally. In case of a defeat, in case that he will still living in the last moment, he will order an holocaust. He will try to make an holocaust, and he will use the potentially bacteriological warfare against the United States, a massive exodus to Florida, and maybe a provocation to the naval base of Guantanamo. But we are almost pretty sure that he will act like a maniac, a schizophrenic, unfortunately.
Dr. Luis Aguilar León, Professor Emeritus of History at Georgetown University, told us,
what Mr. Castro has in terms of death is a tremendous admiration for himself. And he would like to end his career in this earth, in what I call in my book a Gotterdamnerung, the end of the whole thing, the gods dying with him. How do you accomplish that? If the failure in Cuba is absolutely undeniable, he would prefer to die like the last socialist hero, which he has mentioned, the last socialist hero, fighting imperialism. To do that, he has to provoke the United States, and that he's capable of doing.
Recently, the news media have reported an outbreak of a new strain of meningitis in the United States. Carlos Votzkov, a Cuban scientist specializing in ornithology, the study of birds, is now in exile in Switzerland. In a recently published book, he tells of experiments performed by the biological front of the Cuban Zoological Institute, where he worked. In these experiments, migratory birds were inoculated with infectious viruses and set free to fly to the United States. Could these efforts have been successful? Could meningitis or other diseases have been spread to the American people by migratory birds? Quite frankly, we don't know. Even Dr. Votzkov doesn't know with any degree of certainty, but it's hardly a possibility to be disregarded lightly. We asked Dr. Alibek what the consequences of a terrorist biowarfare attack on the United States might be.
In case of smallpox application, we would see one type of consequences because it's contagious, it's quite lethal, 30-35% lethality, and it is able to cause epidemics or even pandemics. In case of application of tularemia, it's not contagious, it's an incapacitating weapon. We would see completely different situation. Anthrax would cause some other consequences. In this case, we cannot describe some kind of general picture of biological terrorist attack, depending on the type of application, depending on the agent, biological agent used, depending on a place of application, time frames, and concentration of those agents. We would see completely different consequences from, let me say, 0 casualties up to hundreds of thousands.
Would Fidel Castro actually launch an attack against the people of the United States?
In the last moment, he will act like that. We know Fidel Castro, and we think that he have all the system prepared to make an holocaust against the United States, in the United States.
Brian Littell, former director of the Center for the Study of Intelligence at the Central Intelligence Agency and head of the CIA's School of Intelligence, said in a conference in Miami,
"Yes, I believe that Castro is capable, by terms of personality, by terms of character, by terms even of his proclivities that we've known now for 46 years. Yes, I think he is certainly capable of that."
I think the only key characteristic, the only key and defining characteristic of Fidel Castro that was not evident at Moncada, it only became evident some years later, was his profound antipathy, his ferocious hatred of the United States.
It's well documented that during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, Castro asked Khrushchev to launch a nuclear attack on the United States.
I'm thinking of Castro's bizarre apocalyptic behavior during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and there have been some other severe miscalculations, but they're relatively rare. However, they could happen again.
During recent demonstrations in Cuba demanding the return of the child Elian Gonzalez, among the slogans repeated by loudspeakers was the chilling phrase, "North America will soon die." In light of all that is known, what is the United States government's policy toward Cuba's terrorist potential?
The political branch of our government is very concerned about keeping a very stable, if you will, and I'll use it inside quotes, constructive relationship with the government of Cuba. So you will find that the political side of the government, in terms of the White House and the State Department, will do everything possible to quash this kind of story or to talk it down and to de-emphasize it. However, you've talked to people in the military and you talk to people in the intelligence community, they absolutely very confidently speak about those capabilities and confirm the information.
And what should be done about this danger lurking so near to our own shores?
I think that these should be questions that we ought to be able to ask to our government. What are the defense capabilities to defend this community, which is so much of a kind of a point sticking out there near the threat, and the country in general. And I think that we are getting closer to the end of the Castro years, so those threats are real.
I think it's very important for us to demand on-site inspection and verification by an international committee, people who are trained to do this. We've had this done in other countries, and we know that dictators do not like this. Of course, Fidel is going to say no, but we have a responsibility to the health and safety of the American citizens to make sure that we are as well protected as we can be. And only by demanding on-site verification and inspection can all of us here in the United States sleep soundly at night, knowing that there is no threat by these chemical weapons being posed at us.
This is our country, and what we need to do, we need to force, we need to start discussing how to force Cuba to open its biotechnological and microbiological facilities, as we wanted to do with Iraq. And we haven't solved the problem with Iraq. We tried to do something with Russia. We haven't solved this problem, but we were able to reduce this country's capabilities in developing biological weapons. And we need to do absolutely the same with Cuba.
Will Castro accept on-site inspection of his biowarfare program in Cuba? Probably not. But it's important for all of us to become aware of the great and imminent danger posed by a chemical and biological warfare program in the hands of a dictator who is so consumed with hatred of the United States.
The larger meaning of this moment is that we are living in a world in which more powerful weapons are in the hands of more reckless people who are more likely to use them. Instead, we've got to prevent the spread of weapons of mass destruction. We have to protect ourselves by deterring their use, and we have to prepare for the possibility that, yes, they could be used right here in domestic America.